a woman emerged from the ground. When she turned around, her skin was very delicate. But shortly after she turned around, her entire body was covered with something. Threads crawled all over the woman's face. And this is the Japanese horror film we're going to talk about today, The Forbidden Game. The male lead, Claire, was at work when he suddenly received a call from the hospital, informing him that his family had a car accident and was being treated. However, when Claire arrived at hospital in a rush, not only had his wife passed away, but his son also took his last breath right in front of him. But just as Claire was holding his son's body, a thunderbolt struck outside his window, directly hitting his son Jamie, who had already died, and miraculously brought the boy back to life. Claire was overjoyed, but his wife left him forever, with no possibility of seeing each other again. But Claire never expected that Jamie had brought back his mother's finger, because just a day before, Jamie found a gecko's tail in the yard. Jamie asked his father if a gecko could survive after its tail was cut off. Claire said yes, its tail would grow again. Jamie pointed the tail in his hand and asked if it would grow into a gecko. Claire jokingly told his son that it could happen and even taught him a spell to make him happier. However, Claire never expected that, under his son's incantation, the gecko tail buried underground really grew into a gecko. So, when Jamie took his mother's finger and buried it in the yard, he wanted to bring her back to life. He believed that as long as he kept reciting the spell, Jamie's mother would surely come back like the gecko, growing back from a single finger and becoming his beloved mother again. Claire looked at his son, who missed his mother so much, and hugged him tightly. The scene shifted to Claire's wife's funeral, where the lovely Miss Hiroko also came to pay her respects. Hiroko watched Jamie sitting in the corner, wanting to comfort him, but Jamie gave her a terrifying gaze. This reminded Hiroko of an incident that happened 7 years ago. Hiroko and Claire used to be colleagues at the same company, and Hiroko had a crush on Claire. On that day, Hiroko was working late at the office when her boss attempted to harass her. Hiroko was frightened and burst into tears, but Claire appeared just in time to stop the boss. This made Hiroko develop a slight affection for Claire. Just then, Claire received a phone call from his wife and left the office in a hurry. However, from that day on, strange things often happened around her. She would have nosebleeds for no reason, receive calls from unknown strangers, but there was no one speaking on the other end. The next day, she received the same call again, and a terrifying voice on the other end warned Hiroko not to get closer. After hanging up the phone, Hiroko saw a strange woman in her mirror at home, but when she turned around, there was nothing there. At that time, Hiroko didn't understand the meaning of "don't get closer," until a few days later, when Claire brought his wife Amy and their newborn child to the company, receiving care and well wishes from everyone. Just when Hiroko wanted to offer her blessings as well, Claire's wife is out of her usual way, telling Hiroko not to touch her. Hiroko recognized the voice, and it turned out that the mysterious phone calls were actually from Amy. When Hiroko returned home, she searched online and found an answer. Sometimes, the grudges of the living can be even more terrifying than those of the deceased. Hiroko couldn't understand why Amy had this power. Suddenly, there was a noise in the room. Hiroko got up to check and saw her keys sliding off the table for no reason. Then, the phone on her desk started ringing, and when she answered it, it was Amy on the line again. Hiroko was so scared that she even threw her phone. Then, the room suddenly lost power, and as Hiroko trembled in fear, she saw Amy appear right in front of her. Hiroko was scared and cowered in the corner of the room. She begged for mercy continuously. Amy, however, slowly approached her, until Hiroko said she would resign and leave the company, never to meet Claire again. The terrifying Amy then disappeared. The room lighted up again. Time goes back to the present. Jamie buried her mother's finger in the yard. Claire noticed that the mound of soil seemed to be reacting. The soil inside keeps stirring. He tried to remove the soil to see what was inside, but he was horrified by what he saw. There is a person inside. Claire knows that it's impossible for a person to come back to life. The person buried in the soil can't be his wife. Due to extreme fear in his heart, he grabbed the shovel on the ground. He kept hitting the creature in the soil again and again, until the creature was injured and retreated deep into the mud. Claire managed to calm his fearful state of mind. Meanwhile, Hiroko also encountered strange occurrences. Hiroko suffered immense inner torment. One day, Hiroko met an exorcist on a TV station. The chubby exorcist's expression suddenly changed when he glanced at Hiroko. Suddenly his expression changed. He asked if Hiroko had encountered any evil spirits recently. If Hiroko ignored it, its power would grow stronger. Eventually, it could possess you and kill you. However, Hiroko didn't believe a word he said. As a result, on her way home, Hiroko received another eerie phone call, and the content of the call was exactly same as what Amy said 7 years ago. Hiroko hadn't recovered from her astonishment. A crow descended from the sky and crashed into her car's windshield, dying on impact. It was then that Hiroko thought of seeking help from the exorcist. The next day, Hiroko arrived at the exorcist's dojo. She asked the exorcist what he saw on her yesterday. The exorcist said, "There is a person lingering between life and death attached to you. He knows that the person is very powerful, but he never expected. He is so powerful." Just as they were talking, the evil spirit arrived at the scene. The chubby exorcist was no match for him at all. The exorcist's sacred fire had all become materials for the opponent to display his power. The chubby exorcist cried and said that because of Hiroko, he is now also deeply entangled in it. He has been targeted by the evil spirit. Then, the chubby exorcist was possessed by a strange force. His eyes began to involuntarily spin in circles. Hiroko was frightened and widened her eyes. She turned around and ran. But as soon as she ran into the corridor, she ran into another handsome exorcist, Jack. He held a big knife to stop her. Hiroko was blocked by a knife-wielding exorcist in front of her, and followed by a peculiar possessed chubby man. Just when Hiroko thought she was going to die, the handsome exorcist with the knife unexpectedly rushed towards the chubby man, and he stabbed the chubby man to death with one strike. The evil spirit transferred into Jack's body. Jack didn't want to harm anyone. He struggled to resist the evil spirit with his remaining willpower. Ultimately, Jack chose to sacrifice himself along with the evil spirit. The situation developed to this point. Hiroko felt that she couldn't just sit and wait for her fate. She had to take the initiative to take action. So she took the camera and went to Claire's house. She wanted to capture any abnormality in Claire's house. Hiroko placed the camera in the yard. She saw Jamie squatting on the ground alone. She didn't know what he was doing. Just when Hiroko wanted to continue filming, she was startled and driven back by the sudden appearance of Claire. That night, Hiroko reviewed the footage she captured. She took it to the TV station to view. She saw a terrifying scene. In the zoomed-in footage, Hiroko saw a terrifying eye blinking at the camera from the small mound in front of Jamie. This made Hiroko believe that Amy might be coming back to life. So she told her colleague Paul about this. After watching it, Paul remained silent for a long time. But he also raised his own question. Why is Amy so different? He thought they needed to investigate Amy's background. Therefore, Hiroko and Paul went to the welfare center where Amy had stayed. According to the female director, Amy is a girl who was born with supernatural abilities. While others were eating and drinking soup, she would break spoons with her mind. Not only did Amy enjoy breaking spoons, she also liked to slice cups from which others were drinking. Amy dealt with those who bullied her in her own way. The two of them looked at the room where Amy used to stay, understanding her uniqueness. However, even if she has supernatural abilities, can the resurrection from death really be achieved? That night, just as Hiroko arrived home, she saw her friend Mary outside the elevator. When she invited her best friend into her house, she noticed that something was off about her. Mary not only seemed mentally absent but also had no shoes on. Furthermore, her feet were covered in bruises. Just as Hiroko wanted to express concern for Mary, Mary's eyes began to roll terrifyingly. In Hiroko's horrified gaze, Mary stood up and lunged at Hiroko. Hiroko pushed her away. Mary grabbed a knife. She continued to attack Hiroko with the knife. As Hiroko was about to be killed, Paul appeared in time, knocking out Mary and saving Hiroko. At this moment, Hiroko remembered the exorcist's words. They had to destroy the body of the person who returned from the other world. Only then could they put an end to all of this. Hiroko had no other choice. She could only go to Claire's house once again, and prepare to destroy that terrifying body. When Claire saw Hiroko's arrival, he immediately led her inside the house. However, when they pulled back the curtain in the yard, they were horrified to see the small mound in the yard. It was continuously moving up and down. It seemed like there was something terrifying inside. It was about to break through the soil. Hiroko said, "We must destroy her body. Otherwise, she will come back to life with a terrifying curse." Claire also understood that this was something he had to do, so he picked up an axe and approached the small mound. Just as Claire was about to strike with the axe, he unexpectedly heard his wife crying. He hesitated for a moment, but after Hiroko's continuous reminders, Claire finally made up his mind to make a clean break with it. At that moment, a hand emerged from the mound and grabbed Claire's ankle. He was frightened and fell to the ground. Hiroko, seeing this, picked up the axe. She swung the axe down towards the arm. However, Amy, whose arm was cut off, miraculously reattached the limb. Immediately Amy crawled out from the mound, but Amy, who was originally like an angel, suddenly turning into a ferocious appearance. Amy chased after them with the axe. This frightened both of them, causing them to turn and run. Eventually, they escaped into a small cabin. Claire also expressed his feelings to Hiroko. He said that when he lived with Amy, he had been living in constant fear, because no matter where he was or what he did, Amy knew everything. It was as if she was always by his side. Every time Claire interacted with Hiroko, Amy would call him immediately. Therefore, Claire described his life had always been very oppressive. As Claire finished speaking to Hiroko, Amy chased them into the small cabin. Both of them could only continue to run away. When they reached the railroad tracks, a train was approaching them. Claire took advantage of the moment when Amy lunged at them. He grabbed Hiroko and jumped aside. As the speeding train passed by, it crushed Amy into pieces. Just when they thought everything was over, Hiroko received a call from Paul. He said he had found out Amy's true identity. It turned out that Amy's mother was once the founder of a cult. She possessed extraordinary supernatural abilities. However, she was killed by her own followers. Amy was also sent to an orphanage. After her mother's death, her supernatural abilities transferred to Amy. It seems that this kind of ability can be inherited. If it can be inherited, then Amy's son, Jamie, should also possess these terrifying supernatural abilities. The scene shifts. Back at home, in the yard, Claire saw broken limbs and arms of Amy crushed by the train were getting pieced together bit by bit. She seemed to be attempting to reassemble herself to resurrect once again. At that moment, Claire saw that Jamie was controlling everything. He was controlling the resurrection of his mother's corpse. He was also the one who had been threatening Hiroko. Even the two exorcists died in his hands. And all of this started from the day of the car accident. The lightning bolt from the sky not only saved Jamie's life, but also activated the latent supernatural genes within his body. However, the act of resurrection would have backlash. Suddenly, a thunderclap sounded above Claire's head. The thunderbolt struck Jamie and Amy. Flames engulfed both of them. The thunderbolt took them away. However, in the end of the film, the small mound began to stir once again. The film ends here. As we reach the end of the movie, there might be a second season to the film. The film captured a great sense of horror, unconsciously immerse audience in the movie. The movie also tells us, when our loved ones are in this world, we should treat them well. If you enjoy our channel, please click on the subscribe button and follow us.